Hey you guys, and we're back to book reviews, taking on The Well of Ascension, Brandon Sanderson's middle novel of his iconic Mistborn trilogy. I'll start with a brief spoiler-free review, then go into an in-depth spoiler section. Let's start with my general impression. For a middle book, it was not so bad.
And nothing in the world is so bad as something which is not so bad.
It got me interested in the final book and developed the characters. The book is well written and excellently sets up the next book. However, reader be warned, the plot and the world building work against each other. So, the beginning is a bit of a slog, and the end, well, you'll have to read it. The book wasn't bad, but for a Brandon Sanderson book, it was a bit of a letdown. On to spoilers. This review, like my other reviews, will examine characters, world building, and plot. But as this is my first sequel review, I'm only going to focus on the elements that were introduced in this book and those that I had a strong reaction to. If something isn't mentioned, like Straffventure, that's because I think it was fine, just not remarkable. Characters. Vin. Oh dear Vin. In the first book, Sanderson drove you right to the edge of a love triangle and then swerved to avoid creativity catastrophe. Not this time. He shoved you off that cliff without a parachute and splattered your emotional stability on the ground.
Threw it on the ground!
While on the one hand, I imagine it would be difficult for a street rat to ascend to Empress by day, assassin by night, but on the other, you can't complain about Elland not needing you on one page, then on the next complain that he's using you. Well, maybe you can, but you'll get zero sympathy from me. Also, Vin totally suffers from love-struck idiocy in this novel far too often. She wantonly disregards her life's training of distrust for a random Mistborn whom she knows is the enemy. It may have worked with Elland before, but the signs that Zane was not Elland were there from the beginning, and she blows right past them. I do think her relationship with Soon is a saving grace, and it was a relief when she finally made a decision. Zane. Like Kelsier in The Final Empire, Zane is the insane character who sets the timetable in this book. Not everything goes according to his plan, but ultimately all the characters are at his mercy until his death. Unlike Kelsier, Zane is an unlikable sack of shaving cream, even as a villain. Also, he never gives the reader insight into his plan, and not in a good way. Without the little setups and payoffs early in the story, there is nothing that drives the reader further into the book. Rather, just the pull of the promise of an answer. Some people may like being dragged around by a maniac, but not me. Elland. On to the better part of the novel. Watching Elland learn to be king was adorable. Like a gender-bent Princess Diaries, this plot is the only thing that gives the reader satisfactory setups and payoffs in the first half of the story. However, Elland is a terrible king and statesman, like unbelievably bad. Not just because he's a slob, but also because, according to Sanderson, he's an idealist. Baloney. I'll dive into this more in a later video, putting aside Sanderson's simplistic view of politics. Elland is a man who remains to make the best decisions with the information available. This is all I ask for in a character, and oh man, he delivers. Tyndall and Saitiate. I loved these two in this book. Tyndall's lessons for the man who would be king are just great life advice in general. while Sazed finally becomes aware of his own inadequacy. I think that his ex machina status went to his head, so it's nice to see him get struck down a peg. I'm sad that Tyndall had to die, but I'm happy to watch Sazed suffer. The duo's research ultimately fixes the villain twist problem from the last book. It's like Sanderson realized that having a good boy go bad was far more intriguing than the villain Rashik was painted as in the first book. So this time around, he's like, but wait, there's a twist. The crew.
What happened? Your balls drop off?
It's reasonable that outlaws would struggle to uphold the law, but as Kelsier said in the last book, they knew how to break down a large problem into doable, smaller chunks. And then they did it. This book, they didn't even think to have someone spying on the members of the town council to warn the king if they were going to cabal. Dachshund, you had one job. As for the others, there was so much internal politicking that they could have done to secure their position that they didn't do. It's infuriating. Instead, they just sat on the sidelines saying, oh, Elland says we can't take the throne by force, so persuasion is completely out of the question. I get that soft power hadn't been widely used in the Final Empire before, but if there was a group of innovators who would be willing to try it, even if they failed, I would have bet on these guys and lost. Tensoon. Oh, Kandra, you crafty, sincere, intriguing little weasel. I did not see your twist coming the first time, but upon rereading, oh yeah, you're not as good as you say you are. In the context of the story, I was appalled by your actions. But looking back, I believe you were brilliant. Marsh.
I'm shocked.
To find out that Marsh is a villain. Worldbuilding. This book spent a lot of time explaining the intricacies of siege warfare and how to run a government. Yet, it gets it wrong on both counts. I'm not sure if this is because Mr. Sanderson didn't know how these things actually work, or because his characters didn't know how these things work. Government, I'll go into more detail in a later video, but even I, who am no expert at siege warfare, know that once a reasonable enemy gets into a city, they attack. They don't sit in town halls waiting patiently to be elected king. Plot twists are only engaging when they aren't stupid. The reveal at the end that everything the characters thought they knew about the prophecy was a lie probably redeems most of the expositional mire that spans 99% of this book. At first, I was relieved to find out it was a lie. Also, that Vin was actually being manipulated by an unseen malicious deity, not just dark-haired angry boy. But I'm also a bit peeved that Mr. Sanderson took us on a book-long detour into lies and drudgery to depict that the true bad guy was bad. Plot. As I mentioned, Mr. Sanderson uses this book to build up the passive, almost imperceptible power of an evil deity creating a world of chaos. Therefore, the main plot passes at a passive, almost imperceptible pace. Sure, characters do things, but the reader either isn't given an explanation or the explanation does not make sense. True, the end reveals that it's not supposed to make sense, but it's small consolation when you're halfway through and the once brilliant characters are now acting like dunderheads. Also, character arcs were ill-spaced. In the first book, Mr. Sanderson intertwines Vin's personal character arc to span the entirety of the novel. Here, The first half is all Vin's internal struggles with a pinch of macrocosm, while the second half is the inverse. I wish he would have aligned these two arcs closer. In conclusion, I probably would not have finished this book if it weren't for the hype about the series. Having read the final book, I understand why Sanderson did the things he did, so it's not poorly written, but my tolerance for stupid characters only goes so far, and the characters act dumb for too long in this novel. The Well of Ascension does focus on politics, but Elland's grasp of politics is so insipid that next week I am going to take this black stone and shove it so far. Sorry. This black stone and shove it into his head so that next time he creates a government, it will last more than a year. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and/or subscribe to see more. Thank you. Your patronage is greatly appreciated.